Job chapter 40 tonight, Job chapter 40. And tonight we're gonna look at the next couple of chapters here in this particular book. And it's important for us to note that God is still speaking here. And we looked at some things that God had shared with Job in our last time together. And so we continue that theme here tonight. And the title of our lesson is Hoping in God. One of the reasons why we chose this particular series is because of this theme of hope. And of course our theme this year as a church is hope in God. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to kick off this year with this particular series. And if Job can find hope, something to hope in, certainly any one of us can. They say the world's tallest dog on record had the name. This will come as a great surprise to many of you. The name was Zeus. I love it when somebody has like a tiny little dog and they name it Goliath, or some big name and that sort of thing. But if you're gonna have a big dog, I think Zeus is probably a pretty good name. This was a Great Dane, and he lived in Otsego, Michigan. And of course, he was named after the mythical king of the Greek gods named Zeus. He only lived to be 5 years, lived a fairly short life, which is not all that uncommon for those larger animals, those bigger dogs. But he grew to be 3 feet 8 inches tall while standing on all fours, which again, that 3 feet 8 inches may not seem a whole lot to us, but we're talking about a dog on all fours, which is pretty significant. When he would stand on his hind legs, he was an astounding 7 feet tall, 4 inches. So, I mean, this is a mammoth dog. You can only imagine. I have to tell you, I have never been super comfortable around big dogs. I just get a little nervous, that at a dog that can look me eye to eye, that kind of frightens me just a little bit. Part of it was, I grew up in a home where we had dogs throughout our childhood, and my mom's one rule was that if we're gonna have a dog, it couldn't shed. She was not gonna deal with the dog hairs and that sort of thing. And so most of the dogs that don't shed typically are a little bit smaller. And so that was sort of how things worked in our home. I well remember working on a bus route, and in a lot of the bus routes, if you've got a small dog, you're a loser. You got to have a Rottweiler or a Doberman or something like that to walk and it's a sign of strength or whatever. And I remember years ago I was on bus visitation off West 130th Street. And I remember I was out knocking some doors, and we were actually visiting some folks that normally came on the bus. And so I went to the door that day, and it was a nice day like today was. And you always do, you sort of size up your surroundings and that sort of thing. And I walked up the door, and I noticed that the front door was open, and there was a sort of like a storm door, a screen door would be, but a portion of it was missing. And so typically, some of the tricks of the trade when you're out knocking doors, that sort of thing, if you see a beware of dog sign or whatever, and there's a door open, you won't be able to see this. But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll kind of put our foot up against the door and knock, just in case, a dog comes running, he can't, nudge the door open and that sort of thing. So I'm thinking to myself, well, my foot against the door is not going to work a whole lot because it's missing a portion of the door. So anyways, and I didn't know what kind of dog we had, so I knocked on the door, and I kind of took a step back, and I'm waiting, and all of a sudden I hear footprints. Not footsteps, footprints, right? Humans have footsteps, dogs have footprints. And I could hear it, and I didn't know what kind of dog it was. And so I started to back up a little bit, And I'm thinking, okay, you start to think about your route of escape. And the next thing I know, this dog comes flying through that open portion. And now I am running backwards full speed. But what I didn't realize was that this family had left some toys in the front yard. And I'm running backwards trying to get away from this dog. I tripped over one of the toys in the yard, and I went down on my back. And I'm laying, and I sit up, and I look, and it's a Chihuahua. And that is no lie. I promise you, that is not I'm not lying to try to make the story better than it was. And I was totally humiliated. I felt like such a loser, And to make matters worse, a couple of other of our bus workers were across the street, and they watched the whole thing go down from across the street. I could take you to the very house where it happened. And so again, some of you, the bigger the dog, the better. Then there's some of us where, we're not quite that way. My kids take it to another level. My kids are afraid of cats. Like, I've never met anybody afraid of a cat. Like, a cat is, from my perspective, cats are just sort of there. Actually, a lot of times they're not there. You don't even know that they're there. The one thing about a cat that is a little bothersome is they're a little sneaky, right? They're quieter than dogs and that sort of thing. But my kids, literally, if there's a cat present, much less a dog, they're out. But let's think about this massive dog, right? This Zeus, this Great Dane, on its hind legs, standing up 7 feet 4 inches tall, and we would say, wow, that is an enormous dog. I mean, that would be something that would be impressive, to all of us. We would, hey, look at the size of that thing. That would catch your attention. However, compared with other animals, it would look somewhat small and insignificant, wouldn't it? I've had on 2 separate occasions, I've had opportunity to visit Kenya, there in East Africa, and on both of those occasions, we took one day and we spent at one of the game reserves. And I have seen in the wild, I've seen elephants, I have seen giraffes, I have seen lions, hyenas, cheetahs, and of course those are just some of the more exotic animals. And I just have to tell you that, Zeus compared to a giraffe that's, perhaps 20, 22, 24 feet tall looks somewhat small in comparison. And that really, that picture that we start off with here tonight is really the stage or the sense in which God is trying to communicate to Job, right? So Job, we've said he's had all of these things fall out in his life. He's frustrated. He has requested, a day in court with God where he could lay out his case as to why this should not have happened to him and just how righteous he is. And what God is really doing here is God is trying to show Job, okay, you think you're righteous, and certainly God says some very glowing things about Job in the beginning of this book. But the comparison game here, in comparison, see, Job is righteous if he compares himself with, the guy that lives down the street. But if Job compares himself with God, he's not very righteous, right? In fact, what does Isaiah 64 and verse number 6 say? It says that all of our righteousnesses are as filthy rags. So in God's sight, the righteousness that you and I try to earn and try to present to Him, in the sight of God, it looks filthy because it's still tainted and stained by sin. And so Job is still a sinner. Is he a mature man of faith? No doubt about it, but he still has a sin nature like every man has. And so God is trying to knock Job from this lofty position that he has put himself in. If Zeus goes to the local dog park, right, and he walks around there in the dog park, he's the king, right? He's the king of the hill. But if you take Zeus to, the Serengeti and you set him free among the lions and the cheetahs and the elephants and the giraffes, Zeus feels pretty insignificant and pretty small. And so that's really the premise that we find here in this particular lesson. And here's what we're going to discover. We're going to discover that God highlights 2 animals in particular. And I will just say right off the bat that there is some debate over what exactly these animals are. And I will also emphasize to you that from what I can tell, these animals no longer exist today. And of course, remember, we go back to the fact that Job lived perhaps around the time of the patriarchs, and we looked at some reasons as to why that's probably the case. So we're talking about maybe around the life of Abraham, maybe just before Abraham. So we're going all the way back to Genesis chapter number 12. So it is a post-flood world, right? But again, we understand that there's probably still some animals that are present that were going to go extinct eventually. And we would guess that the two animals that God speaks of here in these chapters likely have gone extinct, so that they're no longer with us. However, when we see some of the descriptions of them, it causes our minds to wander a little bit. And so we'll look at all of these things. All right. So let's jump into Job chapter 40. Look in verse number 6, if you would. Job chapter 40 and verse number 6. And notice the Bible says, "Then answered the Lord unto Job out of the whirlwind and said, Gird up thy loins now like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me." So that language looks familiar, doesn't it? Because we looked at a couple of verses last week in which God said something similar. Gird up your loins like a man. And of course, remember we said that was a reference to the fact that they would have worn more longer flowing type of garments, the robe type of a thing. They probably would have been in the habit of wearing. And that is obviously not very conducive to sparring or some type of an athletic competition, some type of a battle between people. And so what God is saying when He says to Job, He says, get ready, because we're gonna enter into some competition here. I'm going to give you an opportunity. You've wanted your day in court. Okay, you can have it. Gird up your loins like a man. And so God is essentially telling Job, you're about to face a second round of my questioning. Now look in verse number 8. "Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me that thou mayest be righteous? Hast thou an arm like God? Or canst thou thunder with a voice like Him?" So you see these questions, right? And the answer to all of these, right, this is rhetorical. Rhetorical questions are questions that don't really need a response. They're asked without necessarily a response in mind. And so when God is asking Job these questions, the response of Job is, I can't contend with you. I cannot disannul your judgment. I cannot condemn you. I would never condemn you. I don't have an arm like you have. I cannot thunder with a voice like you can thunder with a voice. So I mean, the answer to all of these is no. And yet God is asking them anyways. Verse number 10, "Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty." Now this is interesting, right? Because what is the position of Job right now? There's no beauty to Job, right? Remember when his friends saw him, they didn't even recognize him. He was so disfigured from what Satan had brought into his life. And now God is telling this same man who is still under the curse of what Satan has brought into his life. God is telling him, hey, you make yourself beautiful. Try to look like me. Try to match my majesty and my excellency and my glory and my beauty. And obviously the answer is I could never do that, but I especially can't do it in the position that I'm in now. Verse 11, "Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold everyone that is proud, and abase him." Now think about what God's telling him to do. God is telling him, hey, you on your own, you try to deal with every proud man in this world, right? I have a hard enough time dealing with myself and my own pride and suppressing that and keeping that from rearing its ugly head in my life, much less dealing with the pride of others. See, these are things that only God can do. And God is trying to show Job just how helpless he is, just how insignificant he is. Look at verse number 12. "Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place." Now, I dare you tonight to go to a place that is known for wickedness and try to shut it down. Walk into the seedy places of town. Why don't you identify where the drug dealers are hanging out, and why don't you on your own, right, pull a little Barney Fife and go out and what is it, citizen's arrest, right, and try to shut down the wickedness. You can't do that. I can't do that. But God certainly could if He so desired. God has the ability, the power to deal with the prideful and to tread down the wicked in their place. He says, "Hide them in the dust together and bind their faces in secret. Then will I also confess unto thee that thine own right hand can save thee." So God says, listen, if you can do these things, then I will admit that you're equal to me in power. I will admit that you are as great as I am. I will admit that your righteousness is equal to mine. And of course, again, as we said a moment ago, all of these questions, they're rhetorical. No one can do any of these things. No one can even approach these things. These are things that only God can do. And so we find here that God questions Job's power. God questions Job's power. Now, how powerful are you? You and I, we think we're powerful until we have children, right? And then those children begin to push back, and they begin to resist. And there are days, right, in which we just want to throw our hands up, and we could turn the tables over, I suppose, in the house if we wanted to, but I don't suppose that's a great idea. We could pound our fist if we wanted to, but the reality is most of us might even arrive at a level where we can't even control our own children. And that shouldn't be a huge surprise, because I think if we're honest with ourselves, most of us have a hard enough time controlling me, controlling us, controlling my own fleshly impulses and lusts and urges, right? And so God is questioning Job's power. And by the way, Job is referred to as the greatest man in the East. Job is, the Bible calls him complete. He's mature. He's perfect. He is upright. He was one who feared God and he hated evil. So the best man among us, whoever that may be, the best woman among us in this room, the one who walks with God the closest, the one who is suppressing their flesh in submission to the Lord and to His will, the best, probably doesn't even measure up to where Job is. And yet Job finds himself so far inferior to God and to God's power. And that's the reality, really, for all of us. But notice that secondly here, God illustrates His sovereign power in these verses. So the first animal, the first beast that God refers to is introduced to us in verse number 15. And so He says, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar, like a tree. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him." So here's this animal, this beast by the name of Behemoth. And we see here that God displays His sovereign power over this creature named Behemoth. And we see the reference to that in verse number 19, where He says, "He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him." So what God is saying here to Job is He's saying, okay, take a look at this beast over here. Now, there have been some that have wondered, well, could this be a hippopotamus? And they say, did you know the animal that kills the most men in Africa is not a lion? It's not. Did you know that it's a hippopotamus? That's what I've been told on my trips there, and I'm glad I've never seen one of those. The Hungry Hippo game has sort of a new twist when you consider that he is the animal that claims the most lives of men. They say the reason why the hippo is so dangerous is because he dwells in the water, and men are drawn typically to water, and whether it be for bathing purposes or whether it be to collect water and take it back to for cooking or for cleaning or even for drinking. And so because of that, and the hippo dwells underneath the water, he is able, and I think sometimes we sort of, like some of you knew that, but some of you are like, really? Like a hippo? I didn't know a hippo ate more men than a lion would. We would naturally have and so I think maybe just in our minds we think, well, I don't suppose I have to fear that as much as I would have to fear this animal. But some have thought maybe this is a hippo. However, that description breaks down with some of the, a hippo doesn't have a tail like a cedar. I don't know if you've ever seen a hippo's tail, but it's pretty pathetic. Now the rest of him's pretty impressive, but the tail is not all that is not all that impressive. But so I don't. The truth is, my personal opinion for Behemoth is that he would be some form of a dinosaur. And again, obviously, there is it is well established that at one time dinosaurs did roam the earth. Now we would probably disagree with the years between when they roamed and where we are, as opposed to what maybe natural or human scientists would say, because we do believe in a younger earth. But likely this is a dinosaur that survived maybe on the ark, survived the flood, but over time eventually went extinct. But here's what God is saying. God is saying to Job, look at this behemoth. And by the way, we use behemoth now to describe something huge, right? When I was a youth pastor and we were at camp, Brother Nick, you'd remember those days. We would play a game called Behemoth Ball, and it was a ball that was taller than me, and we went to camp one year, and we had a young man, and the first event of the week was always on Tuesday morning at about 9:30, 10 o'clock, whatever, and literally the first event of the week was Behemoth Ball. And the bellboy, you remember that. And he came to me midway through that game, and he's like, "Oh, hey, Brother Pete, I think my arm is broke." And he holds his arm up, and it's going in two different directions. And I'm like, "You think, right? Yeah, you think." And so Brother Nick was always game to get off the mountain. So we took him to the hospital, and I think we hit up the Chinese buffet while we were there, if I remember correctly. And any chance to get out of the dining hall, right, for a meal was always a bonus. So he could get this bone set and all that. But anyways, so we will refer to something that is massive as behemoth, right? So this animal, whatever it is in comparison to a man, it is an enormous animal. And here's what God is saying specifically in verse number 19, that he is the chief of the ways of God. So God is perhaps saying, he is the greatest of my creation. Maybe he is the strongest. He is the biggest. He's the most powerful. He is the most feared. All right? Now notice what he says at the end of verse number 19. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. So the idea being that God is saying no man can tame or can subdue behemoth because you didn't make him. You don't have the power to approach him and to bring him low and to bring him into subjection to you. The only one who can do that sort of thing is the one who made him. Well, who made behemoth? Well, God did, because God made all things. And so God, again, he is displaying his sovereignty. He is displaying his power over the greatest things, right, in creation. The things that man would look at and say, I'm not coming up near that. I'm not going to approach that. I don't have the power to deal with something like that. And God is saying, okay, you don't have the power, but I do, because I created him. And if I wanted to, I could make my sword approach unto him. In verse number 20, surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees in the covert of the reed and fens, and shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river, and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. That's quite an animal. To drink that kind of drink, and to think, hey, I can empty this river if I so desire. Verse number 24, he taketh with his eyes, his nose pierceth through snares. So God again displays his power over this creature by the name of Behemoth. But notice, secondly, we find here, letter B, that God displays his sovereign power over another creature. And he's introduced to us in Job chapter 41. And I got to be honest with you, this one to me is really fascinating. Job 41, notice in verse number 1, canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put an hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird? Or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay thine hand upon him. Remember the battle, do no more. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? So behemoth, there in chapter number 40, and then this animal by the name of Leviathan is announced to us in chapter 41. And again, just the mere mention of his name seems to be an awesome thing among men during this time. Now, I am not going to be dogmatic about this, but one of the things I find so fascinating about this Leviathan is really just the description. It says in verse number 10, none is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? Have you ever seen a house, Beware of Dog, right? The idea is, hey, enter this property at your own risk. Certain dogs, I love it when, beware of dog, and then there's a little dog, there's a chihuahua, in the backyard, right? Most of the time, people are not going to be too afraid of something like that. But, there's certain dogs, certain animals that you don't want to stir up. Certain animals that you don't want to, startle. That you don't want to, I remember years ago, I was at Bible college, and every so often, it wasn't very often, but every once in a while, we would have some free time. And I had a friend in those days who had a Jeep. And the Jeep, the top could come off the thing. And we were about an hour or so from the Smoky Mountains. And so every once in a while, I'd say, hey, his name was Stanley. Stanley, let's go to the mountains. And he's like, all right. He was always down. And I just have to maybe put some gas in his car and buy him a hamburger or something, And he would take me and the guys, and we'd go. And so we, one of the places we would enjoy going was Cades Cove. Has anybody ever been to Cades Cove before? Yeah, you've seen it. It's a beautiful, beautiful area there in the Smoky Mountains. And a lot of times you can see animals. We saw bears there before. But one day we were walking through a field in Cades Cove, and I took a step in higher grass, and as soon as I did, I saw something move at my feet, which is never a good thing, right, in a place like that. And I looked down, and there was a snake right there that I was standing over. And I just froze. I remember I just absolutely froze. Because, if this is Ohio, no sweat, right? I mean, as far as I know, there's not too many poisonous snakes up here that can do you harm. But you get in some other places, and I think Tennessee might be one of them, and there might be some snakes that could do some damage. Maybe not like, you'd find in the southwestern United States, rattlesnakes and that sort of thing. But I think there might be some snakes that'd be a little bit dangerous. So I just froze for a minute. And I knew that I had startled this snake, and for sure it had startled me big time, right? And I didn't want to do anything to stir him up, right? Had I been younger, I might have been more immature, and I might have, poked the bear, as it were, But I think I knew better than that, and so I slowly just kind of backed up and moved away from that particular animal. Why? Because I have respect for a snake and what it could potentially do to me. And so God is saying about this Leviathan, no one would dare stir him up. No one would dare to agitate him, to poke the bear, as it were. No, he is feared. Verse number 12. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion. Who can discover the face of his garment? Who can come to him with his double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride. Shut up together as with a close seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They stick together. They cannot be sundered. By his neesings a light doth shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. This is interesting. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils go a smoke as out of a seething pot or cauldron. Now, this is God saying this. Now, is it possible that this is some kind of fire-breathing animal of some sort? As we go back in time and we think of, the fire-breathing dragons, and whether those are, mythical, or whether those were, there's some reality to those things. But God says about him that there is coals that come out of him, that sparks leap out of his mouth. He has burning lamps there in his mouth. Verse number 22, in his neck remaineth strength, and sorrow is turned into joy before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together. They are firm in themselves. They cannot be moved. So this is some scaly type of an animal. Again, this is an animal that most human beings would not dare approach or try to mess with. Just the other day, human beings, I suppose they're the height of God's creation as far as intellect is concerned, but sometimes they're stupider than you can begin to imagine. I saw somebody the other day who was trying to get close to a tiger in a tiger cage. And literally so close, and it might have been probably in a foreign country, but they had sort of stuck their hand into an enclosure, and I mean just immediately, that tiger grabbed hold of that hand, and they got, I'm sure they paid for it, but I mean, it didn't drag them in, and it didn't rip their hand off or anything like that. But just to prove the foolishness of someone that do something like that. Most of us would look at somebody like that and say, something's not right there, right? There's a level there that is just we want to stay far away from those types of beasts, right? So, but who's the creator of those things? Who gave those things life? And the idea being that whoever gave those things life, whoever designed those, whoever created those, is superior to those things, has power over those things. And so God, again, is trying to show Job just how sovereign, how powerful he is. Now, let's conclude our time together. Let's look at the first 6 verses of Job 42, and we'll be done. Notice Job's response to God's power. Verse number 1, then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore have I uttered that I understood not. Things too wonderful for me, which I knew not. Hear, I beseech thee, and I will speak. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Job is saying, this is what I said. This is what I said to God. That I would demand that God answer me. That I would demand that God give a reason for why He has brought certain things into my life. And Job is acknowledging now, finally, he is acknowledging as he has been brought very low, as he has been humbled, Job is acknowledging, who was I? What nerve did I have that I would speak like this about you? Job is saying, what I was saying, I didn't understand. I was opening my mouth and I was letting whatever come out of it, and I regret that. By the way, we've all been there, haven't we? Where we open our mouth to speak, and somebody once said, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we could listen twice as much as we talk. And Job had gotten swept up in this. And Job had opened his mouth more than he should have. And he had made some claims and some accusations against God. And he had demanded that God speak to him in a certain way and that God answer for himself. And he is coming to the end of that. And he has realized, what a foolish thing for me to do. He says in verse number 5, I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Wherefore, look, he says, I abhor myself and repent in dust and in ashes. Now, the first time that God spoke to Job, we looked at it last week, Job was quiet. He was silent. He didn't say anything. This time when God speaks, Job answers. Job gives an answer. And of course, it's an answer of tremendous humility. It's a recognition that God is powerful and that God can do whatever He purposes to do. He has humbled Job. Job comes to an acknowledgement of who God is. He recognizes that God is the omnipotent and the omniscient one. He had always believed in those things, but now he has seen them with his own eyes. He has come face to face with God and with His power. He's heard the voice of God. And Job is now convinced of God's righteous control over all things. So in other words, Job is coming to the end of accusing God or blaming God or being upset that God would do this or would do that. And Job has come to the realization, listen, God is in control. God can do whatever He wants. And I really can't say anything about it because I am so small and I am so insignificant in light of God and in light of His glory. And Job admits that he does not understand God's wisdom in designing and running the universe. The idea that His wisdom to use trials and tragedies and generally unpleasant circumstances to accomplish His will in the lives of the righteous, Job doesn't understand all of those things. They're too wonderful for him. He admits that. He acknowledges he acknowledges those things. Job had questioned God because God's actions didn't match Job's immature understanding of God's ways. Job expected God to act just in the sense of fairness, protecting the righteous from trouble and disciplining those who commit iniquity. But God doesn't always work that way. David had the same question, didn't he? Why is it that the righteous are struggling while the wicked are flourishing and are seen to be so blessed? And we come to the middle of that psalm, and then David, changes his tune, and David sees really as Job is seeing in this particular text as well. So understand that when we question the ways of God, we complain that He isn't living up to what our expectations are. We're lifting ourselves into a position where we're judging God. We're saying that we're greater than Him. And if we could all just get a glimpse, just get a view of God, look around you, look at your world today. Can you deal with the proud? Can you deal with the wicked? Can you take the strongest animals on the planet and subdue them or subject, in your own strength? And of course the answer is to all of those things is no. We don't have the ability to do those things. And so when we recognize who is the creator of all these things, who keeps all of this going, Lord willing, it should bring the unfair accusations against God to a conclusion in our lives. Notice finally that Job mourned over his behavior and the ignorant demands that he had placed upon God. He sits here in ashes and he sprinkles dust on his head, which was a customary way of mourning in the world in which Job lived. Now notice that Job is still suffering from his diseased body. But isn't it interesting? He's not talking about his suffering at this point in time. Because when we get our eyes off of ourselves, when we get our eyes on someone greater, get our eyes on God, oftentimes the problems of this world are maybe not as great as maybe we once thought that they were. Job had no promise from God in his repentance and his humility here. He had no promise from God that God was going to turn things around in his life. There are no guarantees on that. And yet Job is still acknowledging and confessing and just trusting in and believing in God. Even though God hasn't said, okay, you humble yourself and you repent and I'll turn this thing around. Job doesn't know where this thing started. He doesn't know where this thing is going. But Job has come to the realization that he should have been in the beginning, that God is God, He is sovereign, and He is powerful over all things. And again, this is the spirit that every one of us ought to have. And so let's get a fresh glimpse of God tonight. Let's get a clearer picture of who God is. I suppose it'll help us the next time we find ourselves in the midst of a trial. You've heard me say this recently. It boggles my mind how often I hear believers, and sometimes maybe even these thoughts creep into my mind, when we enter into a hard time, we say something like this, I got angry at God, or God was unfair. And if Job would have said that, Job would have been inaccurate. Because God had not brought these things into Job's life. The devil had. Certainly God had permitted it, God had allowed it to test Job's faith. But it wasn't God's idea to bring these trials into Job's life. It was the devil's idea. The devil was attacking Job. So who should Job have been mad at? Who should Job have wanted a day in court with? He shouldn't have wanted a day in court with God. He should have wanted a day in court with the devil. And he'd certainly been a whole lot better off had he kept that in mind. Well, let's pray together.